Okay, a lot's happened the last couple months. We have I'm a little biased, but we have a future legendary coach. It's a lot of pressure, I know. But what's important is that when I introduce him, he's family, right? Because we were here not even a year ago, kind of sharing this experience. And so it's so interesting how we're able to kind of do that. In less than a year, to introduce and hear from Notre Dame's new head coach. And last year, I ran off a whole list of accomplishments that Marcus Freeman had. And none compare to the title he has now, which is the Dick Corbett head coach at the University of Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman. July, what was it, Keith? What, July 20, what was it? Last year's event? Guys, what happens in less than a year, right? This has been an amazing journey for you, I'm sure. But before we get into that, I have a ritual that I have to do. I want to first thank his wife, Joanna. And also, Rocco, Vinny, I got a list here. Capri, I'm so sorry. Gino, Sienna, except for last time, and Nico. Guys, those are 6 children. And before we get started, let's understand that he is also a dad, right? And so the time he's spending here, theoretically, and I know we talked about this last time, but y'all were like, woo, thank God we had a couple minutes, right? But the idea that he's not only the head football coach in Notre Dame, but he's also a dad, right? And so the fact that they're sharing they're sharing him with us this evening, I think they need a huge round of applause for that, so thank you very, very much. What the hell happened, man? We were just here, and to a T, when I talked to folks afterward, honest to God, they were like, he's the next head coach at Notre Dame. And at that time, you were the Bob Hinton defensive coordinator, folks. So, what happened?
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, what's so interesting, though, is can you kind of walk us through, because I think this is fascinating, right? Because this is a shameless plug, but he was on the Zorich podcast not too long ago, and they shared the story, and I thought it was amazing. Kind of walk us through kind of when no one knew what was going on, and there's an amazing video that was out there when you walked into the locker room and the kids were there, right? And your players were there. I'm going to talk about that as well. But kind of walk us through kind of what we didn't see, but what happened behind the scenes, because I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, it was a crazy week. And so basically, fast forward to the Monday. We play Stanford on Saturday, and you fast forward to that Monday, we go straight on the road recruiting. And I'll never forget, I was sitting out of high school in Michigan, outside of a high school, and I get a call from my agent. He says, I have a quick question. And he says, are you 100% sure that Brian Kelly would not be interested in this LSU job? And I said, I'm 101% sure he's not interested. I knew he wasn't. And I go into the school and I go and recruit what I'm doing my job. And I have some missed phone calls, but I'm not paying attention. I just keep hitting my watch and not pay attention. And finally, I look down and 6 missed phone calls from Brian Kelly, and I said, ooh, shoot. So I go out and I say, excuse me, and I go call him, and he says, hey, Marcus, I'm apologizing because you haven't been here for over a year, but I'm taking the LSU job, and I want you and your wife to come down and be our defensive coordinator. He's like, what do you think? I need to know now. And I said, whoa. I said, Coach, I said, you're right. I need to go home and talk to my wife. And from that moment, it was a trickle effect, and it started happening. I started getting calls, and you know, I won't get into all the details, but obviously Jack Swarbrick was saying, hey, are you interested in being a head coach? I want you to interview. I said, okay, I'm definitely interested. And we went and interviewed. It was just me and him for a little over 4 hours. And you have all these thoughts on what an interview for a head coach position would be like, and it was not what I expected, you know. But he called me Wednesday night. I'll never forget. I was in my daughter's room, and he calls me and he says, hey, Marcus, I know who I want to be the head coach to lead me to the 12th national championship, and it's you. And, yeah. And what a surreal moment. And he said, do you want to go talk to your wife about it? And I said, she already told me if I get this job, we're taking it. And so he gave me strict orders, though. And it was, you can only talk to your wife and tell her with the conversation. You can't tell your kids. You can't pick up the phone. If your players call, if your family calls, I don't want you talking to anybody. And so 48 hours was a long time. And the word started to get out, and players were calling me, and family was calling me, and I couldn't talk to anybody except for my wife. And so what you saw on that video is really, it's accumulation of 48 hours of knowing those are your guys. And it was the opportunity to just go embrace your players. And hopefully you see a bunch of players that trust their coach. And it isn't, I'm a player's coach. I'm not crap without my players. You're right, I am a player's coach. And I want that picture to be of a bunch of players that trust their head coach and that are going to do great things together.
So the video he's referring to, unless you live under a rock, it was when he was announced by your strength conditioning coach to the team that he was the new head coach. And I got folks who hate Notre Dame. I got folks who don't know anything about football. They called me up and was like, who is that guy? Who is that guy? Like, I would love for him to be my manager. I would love for him to be my CEO. Like, who is that guy? And what was so interesting was it was so genuine, so organic, right? I mean, it wasn't staged. And so what we saw was a whole bunch of players loving on their coach. And that was amazing. And I've seen it 1,000 times, and every time I see it, I get chills. And the idea that they were able to kind of do that, and you were able to share that with us, right? And so I am not a proponent of kind of videos in the locker room because I think that stuff is sacred. But thank God there were videos when we saw that, right? Because thank God there were cameras there because we had a chance to experience. We just got a small glimpse, right, of what goes on in practice every day. And I'm sure they're not loving on you every day in practice, especially during the off season. But the idea that that's their leader, and that's someone they care about. We had a chance to see that. And I think it's so interesting. So let's fast forward a couple hours. There was a press conference where he was officially announced. And I was very fortunate to attend. After the press conference, I think I spent more time talking to your wife than I did you. I mean, you were gone, but that's okay. So he had a team meeting. And then can you kind of share with what else happened after that?
Yeah, so as you said, it was that Monday, and we have a press conference, and You're doing a lot of media stuff, and then afterwards, the only thing I wanted to do is really quickly embrace your team because we're going on the road. I had to go on the road. What everybody's going to understand about me is the most important thing, other than my players, is recruiting. And I believe in this, and that with great players is. Thank you. It all starts with great players, and any coach that tells you otherwise is lying. And so, the better players we have, the better football team we're going to be. Now, there's a whole bunch more that goes into it, but it starts with great talent, and we have to recruit the best players in the country. So what I did, I had the press conference, told the team, finish off finals strong, and I'll be back in a week, and we got on the road. And I don't know how many states and miles we put in, but I know that first day we went press conference. We stopped at Wisconsin, got our first commit. It was an offensive lineman, Billy. I don't know how you pronounce it. Shrout. Billy committed right there on the spot. Flew to Washington. We had a wide receiver that was committed. Got there about 10 o'clock West Coast time. And then flew down to Arizona because I had to see another kid in the morning. So I think we landed in Arizona probably at 2 or 3 in the morning Arizona time. And so it was pretty exhausting, but it's what matters. It is what matters. It's about the players, and that was an important week for our football program.
Well, so imagine you're his first stop, right? Your stop, he goes to Wisconsin, talk to Billy and his family, and like literally you could say, well, weren't you just like, you had the same suit on, right? Like you didn't have time to change your suit, right? So, I mean, how cool is that, right? I mean, you're the kid being recruited by the guy who just got named the head coach, and like literally 4 hours ago, like he was announced he's head coach, and now he's going to leave. I mean, that's what recruiting is all about. And you have the reputation of being a voracious recruiter. And can you kind of share with us a little bit about kind of finding assistant coaches as well? Because I know you mentioned that part of kind of what you wanted in a coach was that they at least knew what they were doing recruiting-wise.
Yeah, it starts off with getting great men. And I feel strongly about this in that I love our players, right? And I'm going to treat our players like I treat my kids. And that doesn't mean it's buddy-buddy, but I love them. And I'll always respect them and push them, but respect them. So I want coaches that are like-minded in that way. I want to make sure we're bringing in men that love the young people in our program and are going to make sure they treat them like my sons. If they don't want to treat them like their sons, that's on there. But treat them like you're coaching my kids. And that's all I tell them, that you're going to love our players. That was one. Two, I want great football coaches, because if you can't make this young man a better football player, then you're going to do him a disservice. They want to be coached. Our players want to be coached. Our players at Notre Dame want to be first-round picks. And that's what's unique about this group, is that they value education. They understand you have to study and go to class, but they all want to be first-round picks. And so if you're not helping them become better football players, then you're failing them. But three, I want great recruiters, because the more talent we have, the better football program we're going to be. And so you had to fit that category. And that's what I looked for. And I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to get the right guys in there, and we have an unbelievable staff, a great staff, and I'm so fortunate to be a part of this football program. And so I'm excited for the future and what we're going to do together.
And one of the hires, well, please, yes. One of the hires as the new Bob Hinton defensive coordinator is Al Golden. And he was a former head coach. And you shared with me that one of the reasons why you wanted him was because you did not have head coaching experience. Can you share with everyone that? Because I think that's so interesting that, I mean, here's a leader, and I know we have a lot of leaders in the audience. But let's understand that here's an individual who is taking an amazing job, and he's asking a question about, hey, how do you be a head coach? Can you share with us?
Well, I think you look big picture-wise, and maybe a mistake that you see many leaders make is that they want to bring people that they're comfortable with, that are just like them. And I gave you the values that I was looking for. I wasn't going to negotiate bringing in a guy that doesn't love young people, a guy that can't make you better at football, and a guy that's a great recruiter. But I didn't want a whole bunch of guys like me. I wanted guys that were strong in areas that I'm not. And one of those is being a head coach. right? I've never been a head coach. And I needed to bring a guy on our staff that has been through the fire, that has done and answered and put out some fires that I'm just figuring out happens with being a head coach. And so the chance to hire Al Golden was really important. And I started to get to know him throughout the end of his Bengals season, and I interviewed him every week. Every week we got on a Zoom. I just started showing him our defense because part of it was like, I want you to start with where our defense is now and then enhance it and make it yours. But don't come in here and throw a playbook down and help our guys. This is their third defense coordinator in 3 years. And so the more I got to know him, Al Golden is extremely intelligent. He's a really good recruiter, but he does love young people. And he's a huge asset for me to be able to go ask him questions, or he can bring things up to me that maybe I don't see sometimes being in my office. And so that's what was big about hiring Al Golden.
Okay, here's the head coach of Notre Dame that has said, you know what, I don't know something. I've never been head coach before. Let me go out and find one. Like, I know he has an ego, believe me. He was a baller in college. He was the man. Drafted by the Bears. Cole, he was legit. But at some point he realized and said, you know what, hey, I don't have something. Let me find somebody who does. Okay, what leader do you know? I'm not asking you to throw out names, but what leader do you know that is that selfless that will say, hey, oh, by the way, I'm your new CEO, but I don't know how to be a CEO. Let me find someone. Let me hire someone that's been a CEO before. That doesn't happen a lot, let alone in college football, let alone at the University of Notre Dame, let alone now we have someone who actually is willing to do that.
Well, I think here's the one thing, Chris, that you'll notice about me is coaches all the time tell their players, seek feedback. Go talk to your coach. Go see your coach. He'll make you better. He can tell you things that you don't know. But how many coaches and leaders seek feedback? And that's something I feel strongly about. We had Ed Orgeron on campus for about a week, and he wanted to bring his kids to experience what it was like at Notre Dame. And I said, Coach O, I would love to have your kids here, but I'm going to ask you to evaluate our program, take notes. And then we talked on a Sunday for 2 hours, and it is not comfortable. Nobody wants to hear where your flaws are or where your deficiencies are, but how do you grow, right? How do you grow without figuring that out? And so that's something that I take a lot of pride in doing, seeking feedback and finding ways to improve.
I'm 50. I want to suit up. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just saying. So as a defensive coordinator, you have a different relationship with the whole team. At one point, you're only caring about the guys on the other side of the ball. As the head coach now, guess what? You have 105 kids now. How do you feel your leadership style may have changed or may not have changed kind of now that you're the head coach versus being the defensive coordinator?
Well, I think you have to be very intentional to gain the trust of the other side of the ball, right? And those defensive guys trust me. I was with them every day. I coached them, and they know who I am. They know the personal side of Marcus Freeman. But I've been very intentional to try to gain the trust on the guys on the other side of the ball because we're all right down there? Good? And so I don't want to be known as the defensive head coach. I don't want to be known as, hey, that's Marcus Freeman. He's the defensive head coach. No, I'm just the head coach. And I'm on the offensive side. I'm on the defensive side. I'm on the special team side. I'm on everybody's side. And that's a little bit of the transition, right, that I miss. I miss the competitive side of practice where, as a defensive coordinator, you just want to win every rep. Now, I mean, I can't cheer too loud for the defense because then the offense gets mad. If I cheer too loud for the offense, the defense is mad. But it's all about gaining their trust. And it's being very intentional in the actions that I take as the head coach to gain the trust of my staff, to gain the trust of my players and those that are around us. So,
one of those former head coaches that you've spent some time with was Lou Holtz. And you tell a funny story. Can you kind of share that with us? Because I knew Lou Holtz in a different way than you may have met him. So
the first comment that he said to me. So
yes,
we fly down to Florida, and I just want to spend time picking his brain. And the very first thing he says to me, he sees that video and he said, "Hey, Marcus," he said, "it looks like you're a player's coach. Your players love you." He said, "I'll tell you one damn thing, my players would never call me a player's coach."
Well, so I wanted to share that because literally we would not, I mean, he was definitely not a player's coach, right? I mean, I think he weighs like 75 pounds, like soaking wet with like 20 pounds of equipment on. But as I mentioned before, you were a baller in college. And OU went to the Ohio State University, so you know what it takes, right? So the idea that we wouldn't hug, we wouldn't embrace the host, he was absolutely right. But as you shared, there's different coaching styles. And his way may not work with our current players. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, and I think about when I grew up. My father was in the military for 26 years, and I grew up, he was 43 years old when he had me. So there's distance between our age, and it was very black and white in the Freeman household. You, yes, sir, no, sir, you turn right, you go left, you go left. It's obedience, blind obedience. There wasn't many questions being asked, but as you see this generation now, they don't just follow the norm. Right? They do something that we embrace. We call it challenge everything. They look to find a better way to do things. And so I've embraced that. And so here's how I believe my leadership style is. It starts with trust first. Right? I want to gain the trust of my players. I want our players to trust me. And how do you gain the trust of your players? It's almost, for us, systematic. I want them to know my character. Right? Know me outside of football. Make sure they see me as a father, see me as a husband, and know that I'm a man of character. 2, can I make them better at football players? Right? Do I have the capacity to truly make them better? And 3, do we have a connection? I love to be with our players outside of the football building because I want to have a connection. And so I gain the trust of the players first, and then you push them second. Right? I believe this. You can push players as far as they trust you. And so if we can gain that trust, then all of a sudden when you tell them to go, it's not good enough. There's many times this isn't good enough. This is the standard. You're not meeting the standard. We're going to push you harder. You think you're going hard. You're not going hard. We've got to go harder. But if they trust you, that's when they'll go. And so that's the way we lead.
Please, absolutely. So again, to reiterate, like, we didn't love on Coach Holtz a lot, but he was that disciplinarian that we needed, and he knew what he was doing. We just so happened to win the national championship, which you will hopefully kind of surpass. But the idea is that there are different styles, right? And when you talk about our current generation of student athletes, there's this ugly thing called the transfer portal. So for those folks who might not know, all a current student athlete has to do, and this is with any sport, is go to their compliance office and say, hey, I'd like to transfer. They don't have to have a conversation with their head coach. They don't have to have a conversation with anybody. They can just do what is called put your name in the transfer portal. And that's a real thing. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the transfer portal has affected recruiting and what you see kind of the future for the transfer portal for Notre Dame?
Well, we haven't utilized a transfer portal as much as you'll hear other schools using it because, one, it's really hard to get a undergraduate transfer into Notre Dame. And I respect that. I respect and value the education that you get from this university. So we're not just going to try to bring anybody into this place. In order to bring somebody in, somebody has to leave. And so what you're seeing at Notre Dame is a lot of people don't leave until they get their degree. And so we use it, I think, in a positive way in that there's guys that get their degree first and then say, hey, coach, I'm not playing as much as I want. For my last year, can I transfer? I'm going to transfer and go somewhere that I can play more. And for that, to me, that's great. That's why it's there. For those guys that don't love the competition or not getting instant gratification, so they say, I'm going to go in there and find the easier way, that to me is the negative effects of the transfer portal. But we use it really little. And maybe there's 1 or 2 places in our roster that we want to enhance, and we got to find the right guy. But the most part of our recruiting is built from high school young people that understand the value of the education, understand the value of hard work, and understand what Notre Dame's all about. Because it's not for everybody, but we're going to get the right guys in the country that understand what Notre Dame's about.
And you've had some experience in the transfer portal. You got several players. Can you share with us kind of who you guys got?
You put me on the spot.
Well, so although we're in the Chicago area, there's a school a little up north in Evanston called
I said
the Wildcats.
There's certain roster enhancements that you have to find, and one of those was, everybody knows Kyle Hamilton was the 14th player overall drafted this year. Well, we got
absolutely.
That was an area, the depth at that position was an area of concern for us. And so when you get a profile guy from a great institution like Northwestern, right? He's at a school that you understand they value education there. And he's one of the best players in the country. And he put his name in the portal, and we reached out and said, is there interest? And again, we're not trying to get anybody, but an All-American from a really, really good educational institution, that's a perfect fit for us, and that's why we went in the transfer portal and got him.
So let's understand. I mean, we're talking still about the value of education. And it's so interesting because for years, we've heard you can't win unless you lower standards. I love that question because we won a national championship and we graduated guys and we're great. So it's so interesting to kind of hear that comment, but since we're on the topic of recruiting, I know you're not allowed to say a lot of names, but there's been a lot of success on the defensive side of the ball when you were the defensive coordinator, and there's some high rankings there. And now that you're kind of over the whole program, we're seeing more and more 4 and 5 and 3-star guys who are signing with Notre Dame. So for us fans out there, that's extremely exciting. So what is it like kind of on your whiteboard in the recruiting room when you hear somebody, hey, they're committed there, would you put a line? I mean, how does that process work for those kind of 4 and 5-star guys?
Well, I don't know if we look at rankings as much as evaluate. And as I've told our staff, we're going to evaluate the best players in the country, regardless what school they're at, where they're at. I don't care, coast to coast, Germany, across the world, it doesn't matter. First, find the best players in the country. Then,
hold on a second.
Go ahead.
You already said? First, find the best players in the country. We haven't heard that in a while. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off there, but we haven't heard that in a while. So we're going to look at the best players, the best players in the country. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I think it's easy to look at the profile schools first and then say, let's get the best player from that school. No. I want to look at the best players in the country and then identify, can that person be a fit at Notre Dame? Because as I said before, if you don't value education, you don't value hard work, you won't be successful at Notre Dame. So say I take this young man, I don't care what school he's at, okay, and he's the best player in the country. The second thing we're going to do is get his transcript. What does his transcript say about how much does he value education? Then we're going to look and say, hey, is he tardy to school? Is he absent from school? Because that tells me, do you really think school's important? We're going to talk to the counselors. We're going to talk to the teachers. We're going to talk to the principal and say, does he value education? Does he work hard? Does he respect people? If those boxes check yes, then we're going to fight like hell to get him into Notre Dame. And so,
that's a change. That is definitely a change. You shared a story with me about when you were you were a defensive coordinator for Notre Dame, and there was a young man who didn't fit kind of Notre Dame's profile, let's say. And he committed, and you had a conversation with Coach Kelly at the time, and said, Marcus, hey, this is a great catch because we normally wouldn't have gone after a young man like this. Now, that was as a defensive coordinator. So what the hell are you going to do as a head coach? I mean, the idea that you're going out and looking at the best players first and then seeing if they can kind of get molded into or you're looking at special attributes.
I think my role has changed now as you go from the coordinator to the head coach. As the coordinator, I was the one pushing. Well, now I push our staff, right? And I say, you guys find the best players in the country. Let us, myself, and some of our support staff, let us figure out, is he a fit? And so now the transition from being the pusher to the guy that says, this isn't or is what we're looking for. And so that's where I still have to protect our football program, and I have to protect our university. And I have to bring in the right kids into Notre Dame. And so my transition to head coach now has changed, and now I'm the guy that kind of says, okay, he's a fit, or I got to be able to say, he's not the right one, because you're doing Notre Dame and that kid a disservice if he's not the right fit. So I tell our staff, you guys just go find the best players. You get the transcripts, get us the stuff, and let us now evaluate with our support staff and our team. And so now I want to protect our program.
There was a recruiting giant named Tom Lemming, started this kind of recruiting process years and years and years and thousands of years ago. And he made a comment and said that, find me a great head coach who's a phenomenal golfer, and I'll show you a terrible recruiter. How's your golf game?
Terrible. Non-existent, let me tell you that.
Folks, I mean, okay, you've mentioned the term talent acquisition. Great recruiters listen. Can you kind of share that with us? Talk to us a little bit about that, because great recruiters, I was under the impression that you just sell. So you said that great recruiters are listeners. Why is that?
I think that's one of the common mistakes of selling. We sell, right? And we're selling our university. But the common mistake is you spend too much time selling, that you don't even know what that person wants to hear. And so great recruiters listen. And they'll tell you, these kids, these parents, the champion, whoever's involved, they'll tell you what's important to them. If it's academics, they'll say it. If it's playing time, they'll say it. If it's the class, whatever it is, they'll tell you. But if you spend too much time just talking and not listening, you'll never hear that key point that they tell you, this is what's important to Johnny. And so I encourage our staff to listen. Have that relationship where you're talking to recruits, you're talking to parents, you're talking to everybody that's important, but listen, because at some point they're going to tell you what they want to hear. And we got to make sure that we do a good job of selling that aspect of Notre Dame to that person. Is whatever that point that they want to hear, we have to sell that point to them to get them to say yes. And so we don't hide what Notre Dame's about. We talk about our education, we talk about our network, the dorms, and our football excellence, but we have to figure out what's important to that young person, and really, the only way to do that is by listening.
And an example, there was a young man that liked a certain style of shoe. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about that? Because I think that was a really interesting story. He liked Vans or something like that, and...
Yeah. Well, I like Vans.
Well, of course
right?
you do, yes,
I like
heard.
Vans. My wife hates, she gets on me from wearing them all the time, but I like them. And there was a young man that, I can't remember, it was him or his father. One of them said, yeah, he loves wearing Vans. Coach, we see you in Vans all the time. He loves wearing Vans. So what we did is I bought every member, this was when I was defense coordinator, a pair of yellow Vans. What we called them gold. They were gold Vans. And so when this kid came to campus to do a photo shoot, every coach, it was about 8 of us, walked out in these gold Vans. We took the photo with him, and guess what? He committed.
It's listening. You know, it's hearing what a young man, you know, is interested in. And you're not summing up his whole experience on gym shoes, but it's the attention to detail, which I think is so amazing and which assists in the whole recruiting process. Talk to us about talent acquisition, because I think that's something that is rare to hear in college recruiting. Please.
Well, talent acquisition, the term, right, is bringing in talent, right? Get the best players in the country, but we're strategic in terms of how we look for that talent. So when I say we want to get the best players in the country that fit Notre Dame, what are those best players? What is their makeup? And so we have this thing we call cattle. Number one is, how competitive are you? Most important thing, how competitive are you? I don't care how fast you are, how tall you are, but one, how competitive are you? If I put the ball down, are you going to find a way to win, right? Number two, how athletic are you? How tall are you? Do you look like Cole? Are you tall and athletic and long? Those things matter, okay? Number three is tough. Like, how tough are you? When the game gets hard and somebody punches you in your mouth, you know it's a part of the game, how do you respond? Number four is intelligence. How intelligent are you? You're going to have to be intelligent. I'm not talking ACT score, but can you have common sense? Do you understand the game of football? And then fifth, one of the most important things is leadership. We need more leaders. We need more leaders in society, and we need more leaders on our football team. And so we look for leadership. So what does leadership mean? Hey, coach, talk to me about Johnny. When things get hard, if you're not here, is he the one that's getting everybody together? Is he the one holding other people accountable? Because what you see is, I love to use this thing that you hear people talk about, hey, he's a leader by example. Right? No, Johnny's a leader, but he's a leader by example. So I say, okay, so what is a leader by example? It means he does things really, really well. He's probably one of the better athletes, but he doesn't say anything. And so don't call him a leader by say he's really good at it. He works really hard, but he doesn't say anything. And so that's what that is. We want leaders. We want guys that are willing to say, you know what? Hey, Chris, you didn't touch the line. Go back and touch the line. Hey, you were 5 minutes late. Make sure the next time that happens, you're 5 minutes early, or your butt's going to be running. And so I get a little bit animated about this, because I love leadership. Like, we need more leaders, because you know what? Coaches aren't around. I try to convince our kids, like, you have to be a leader, because there's going to be so many opportunities to do the easy but wrong thing. Leaders do the right thing, man, and leaders hold others accountable. And so we need that. And that's one of the attributes of being one of the best players in the country.
So as a former player at Notre Dame, and as I mentioned before, 53-year-old guy, we were kind of excited that Marcus was named the head coach. We didn't understand what that meant, what that's going to mean for former players. And I see Hunter Bivin in the back there, who I think probably worked his tail off for an amazing, amazing weekend that was geared toward former players. It was called the Legacy Weekend. Can you please tell everyone about that? Because it was an amazing, amazing experience, and I'd love for them to hear it from you as opposed to me.
Yeah, I want to start off by giving Hunter a little shout out. He's our director of football player development. So Hunter is a 2017 grad, and played for us at Notre Dame. And so here's how it all started. It started with, I tell this story, when you're first named head coach at Notre Dame, you pinch yourself every morning you wake up. Man, I'm the head coach at Notre Dame. But at some point, it kind of just becomes what you do. You're the head coach. And so it was in January, one night, I was in, I think, Washington, D.C. I get to a hotel after recruiting about 11:30 at night. And I remember I was like, I just want to watch 20 minutes of TV, and I'm going to go to sleep. So I turn on ESPN, and there's an ESPN 150 or ESPN Classic on the history of Notre Dame football. And so by 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm just sitting there like this, looking at Newt Rockne and Ara Parseghian and Lou Holtz. And I said, man, I pinched myself again. I'm like, I'm the head coach of Notre Dame. And so what I wanted to do is I want our players to understand the privilege you have to play for this university. And so what better way than to bring the history, the former players back to be around this thing. So that's where it started. And so I got with Hunter, and Hunter spearheaded this thing. I said, let's make sure we invite all the former players back, because they've got us to this position. You got us to this position. Peter Chiavarelli's house, he got us to this position. All the former players that have done in blood, sweat, and tears, I don't care if you're a star or not. That's why Notre Dame's in a position it's in. And so I want all of the former players to always feel like this is their home, because it is. You helped build this place and get it to where it's at. So this always will be your home. And I wanted all the former players to understand that. So we had them back. We had about 300 former players back for that Legacy Weekend. And we did something really cool on that Thursday night. And for 2 hours, I told our current players, I said, for 2 hours, I don't want you to think about the present. I don't want you to think about being first-round draft picks. I don't want you to think about the spring game. I said, for 2 hours, I want you to think about the moment the game is over. And for everybody here except for you, Cole, it is over. And at some point, it's going to be over. And I said, I want you to utilize the network. Nobody cared if you're a first-round pick. Nobody cared if you were an NFL Hall of Famer like Jerome Bettis. Everybody in that room was a former or current Notre Dame football player. And so it was such a strong brotherhood. And that was the first time for me I felt like an outsider. And I'm the head coach. But I didn't do what you did. I didn't play for this university. And I thought that was such a special moment for our players to spend time with the former players. And for 2 hours, really think about, you know what, utilize this network. Utilize the great players that have come through here and start making decisions now that will help you in a transition for when it's over. You don't have to stop playing football, but you can make decisions now that will help you when that moment comes. And so that was something, as the head coach, I care deeply about. And I know I'm kind of going off, but when you become the head coach, you care deeply about the future of your young people. You know, this game will end, and I want to make sure for the rest of their lives that they're going to have success, not just currently, but for the longevity of their lives. And so that moment and that weekend was a part of that.
I was very fortunate to be there and experience that weekend. And Pete, I mean, the idea that we felt welcome back is so interesting because, I mean, Pete, you had a great coach. I had a great coach. I mean, that feeling was never there. And something as simple as, and I told you this that evening, the ushers who were there when we entered the building said, "Welcome back." Wow, like, and as crazy as it sounds, that never happened. And so you get a guy who's an outsider from Ohio State, but understands that importance, right? Understands what former players can bring to his current players. And that's that knowledge. It's not about scoring touchdowns. It's not about becoming an All-American. It's about, hey, I'm interested in this field. What can you teach me? And I thought that was so interesting because you're right. I mean, they weren't talking about, hey, I want to be a first-round pick. They were talking about when I'm done playing, where am I going to be? And we had some amazing people. I mean, Dave Casper, Jerome Bennett. There were some great guys in that audience, and you had a chance, and they had a chance to learn from some great players, not about football. And I think that was so important on both ends, right? On the current players, but for a lot of our old guys. I mean, there were guys from Era's year, era that were there, and they had never heard it. So the fact that you have thousands of former players back there behind you, in your corner, just know that, you know, we are there, and the idea that you're helping young people in the process is great. Is that absolutely great? Yeah, you can clap for that. So there's a couple tough questions I'm going to ask you. But first, the last time we were here, we talked about an upcoming game against your former employer, former roommate, literally, for all y'all, Luke Fickle. And that was a game against Cincinnati. And can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you, now since it's passed, going into that game, and kind of really, was it a feeling of, hey, I'm competing against a friend, or I just want to beat their ass because they're an opponent? Like, what was that like?
I owe it to my players to make sure my focus is on how do you prepare them to win, right? It's not about who's across the field. And obviously that game didn't turn out the way we wanted, but I think the reality is you look at this year's NFL draft, Cincinnati had 9 guys drafted, right? And we had 2. And so don't think that talent didn't have anything to do with that. And so that goes back to why recruiting is so important. 9 NFL players on that team, 2 on ours. And so that shouldn't happen at Notre Dame, and that hopefully for the future won't ever happen again.
So before I get to the next question, how do you feel spring ball went for your whole team? Kind of offense, defense, everything else.
It was good. It was good. You get 15 practices to kind of formulate an identity, right? I can have this mindset or this picture that I want our team to look like, but they'll tell us what they're going to look like. And I was really pleased with what I saw over those 15 practices, and what you see is some healthy competition. And how do you create healthy competitions from a group of guys that love and respect each other? They choose to love each other. They choose to say, you know what, that's my brother. But on the field, we're competing for the same spot. And so I love to find ways to create competition, and we do. We have a lot of competition, a lot of different spots, but I love the progression. I love the momentum of this team. We have a lot of momentum right now, and we have to continue it. They're going to have about 4 weeks off right now where they're over. The cool thing about Notre Dame, I got to put in a plug, is that they got 4 weeks off, and a lot of them, I think, we got a certain amount of guys over in Italy that are taking a 3-hour class in Italy for 10 days. We got some guys in Brazil doing internships in Brazil. And so that's what makes this place special, is that you're not only getting the football excellence, but you're also doing things in terms of academic internships and endeavors that you can't do anywhere else in the country. So I really, really like where we're at.
So one of the things y'all may not know, and I didn't know until I did a little bit more research, is the amount of time you're not spending in the office. Just a little rundown. Last week you were in Tampa doing a Notre Dame thing in Tampa. Yesterday, he was in Hilton Head doing a Notre Dame thing there, came back, did an interview with the Vice President of University Relations, Lunani. Y'all can check that out at Notre Dame's website. You came here to hang out with us, and in a couple of days, you're going to be at the St. Louis Club. When do you have time to, be a dad and, coach some stuff? What's going on?
Well, I'm sure a lot of you know this young lady named Dolly Duffy. She keeps me pretty busy, and we've been world travelers, country travelers. We were in New York for about 4 days, and we spoke at 2 Notre Dame clubs there, and then we were in Tampa and Hilton Head and Chicago today, and actually we'll be in LA, Orange County, St. Louis, and she's got the rest.
Oh my gosh.
But here's what I'm doing, right, is that I'm so used to in the month of May recruiting and never being home, and so I have to do something, and it's been great to really get out to these Notre Dame clubs and connect with this network, and this is by far the largest and the best one that we've been to.
Of course.
Unbelievable. And so it's been great to be able to speak and be around with the Notre Dame network, and also I can do a little professional. I went to the Bucks OTAs, and I'll be able to go down to LA and see some practices and stuff, so it's been great. My wife keeps saying okay, so as long as she says okay, I'll be able to get out of the house and do a couple things, but Dolly's been keeping me pretty busy.
Well, and you spoke at a couple of dorms on campus as well. Like, I mean, I'm sure you haven't hit all of them, but I mean, like, what's that like? I mean, you're trying to get them pumped up to come out on Saturdays? I mean, what's...
Oh, I think Lou Holt started that one. Maybe. Yeah, it's really engaging Notre Dame, right? And if you just sit in your office, I'm not going to cheat football, and I don't want people to think, well, you need to go back and no, trust me, I'm not cheating football. I won't cheat football, but it's becoming one with this university, and so. The unique thing about Notre Dame is it forces you to become a community. And it's 8,500 people, right? And it's the same thing for our kids in that our kids come from all over the country to a place in South Bend where there's really nothing else to do but to become a community.
We all know.
Exactly.
We all know.
And so that's what I'm trying to do is just continue to meet Notre Dame because it's so important to me. As I say this all the time, in a year you fall in love with this place. And this is, to me, my chance to and my opportunity to really become one with this network and with this university.
Well, 2 more questions and we're done. So one of the things that I think automatically endured all of the alumni to this Ohio State Buckeye former player, and I didn't know this, was you reinstituted pregame mass. Okay, you and I have not talked about this. And I've talked to some people in this room about this. But being able to be in a room with your brothers before you go out to compete in an environment that, I mean, I'm not equating it to like warring like that, but when you're going to compete to be your best and you have a place where, I mean, you're being blessed by a priest, dude, like before you go out to battle, like that's like some gladiator stuff, right? And I loved it. Like, and I had all the medallions that Father really gave us. I mean, it was extremely important for me. And I talked to a lot of players, and when we heard that that wasn't going on, we all went nuts. So can you kind of share with us kind of how you were able to reinstitute it, because like a lot of people didn't know that it stopped.
Well, I'm going to give you the short version because Keith is over there looking at me like, hey, we need to. So basically, the short version is when I came on a recruiting visit back in 2002, I remember seeing the players come out of the Basilica and walk to the stadium. I thought that was the coolest thing. And so when I got here last year, we ended up having Mass on a Friday. I'm like, well, hey, on Saturday, we're still going to go to Mass. And somebody was like, no, we're not going to Mass. And I'm like, in my head, I didn't ask questions. I just thought maybe because of COVID or something like that. And I didn't know when it changed. Well, then I become the head coach. And I go to Ron Paulus, who's a former player, and I say, hey, Ron, when did it change that we don't go to Mass on game days? He said, well, sometime Coach Kelly made a change. And I said, okay. I said, well, like, who do I have to talk to kind of get that change to go back to having Mass on Saturday? He said, there's one person that really makes that decision. I was like, who? The head coach of Notre Dame. So I said, we're changing it right then and there. That we're going to have Mass on game.
This is the real deal. I mean, the idea that we were able to share some time with him last year, he was gracious enough to share some time with us this year as the head coach. You guys can understand why young people will follow him. And also some of our older guys too. We would love to kind of jump in and at least give you maybe about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, something. We still think we have it, but it's the idea that he's getting folks fired up. And I haven't felt this in a very long time, and I know y'all haven't either. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Dick Corbin head coach at the University of Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, y'all. Check out YouTube's new Super Thanks button below if you enjoy and want to support the Zorich podcast. Please hit the thanks button to show your appreciation and leave a comment. Thanks for your support, and go Irish!